After her husband betrayed her, Melissa Grant packed everything she had left into an old SUV and took her 9-year-old daughter to a closed summer camp deep in the Adirondacks. The winter caretaker job was supposed to give them one thing: they desperately needed a place to call home. Then the camp manager gave Melissa a strange warning. Whatever happens, don't open cabin 7. It had been locked since a 10-year-old boy disappeared in 1976. Melissa had every intention of obeying, until the night she had no choice but to unlock it. Stay with Melissa. Sometimes the truth waits a lifetime for the right person to find it. 3 weeks earlier, Melissa Grant was driving north through the Adirondacks with everything she still owned packed into the back of an aging SUV. Snow moved softly across the windshield, turning the road ahead into a narrow ribbon of gray and white. Beside her, 9-year-old Sadie slept beneath a second-hand winter coat. A cardboard box of school books rested at her feet. Behind them were 3 suitcases, 2 plastic bins, a lamp, and the framed photograph Sadie refused to leave behind. 17 years of marriage had ended, and somehow, most of Melissa's life now fit inside one car. She hadn't told Sadie how close they had come to having nowhere to sleep. At a diner 2 hours earlier, Melissa had ordered 1 grilled cheese sandwich and told Sadie she wasn't hungry. The truth was, she had $11 left in her checking account. Melissa had once believed she had built a safe, ordinary life outside Albany. Nothing fancy. A husband, a modest apartment, Sunday groceries, school mornings, and a daughter she loved more than anything. Then she discovered her husband had been seeing another woman. The betrayal hurt, but what stayed with Melissa was something quieter. For months, whenever she questioned him, he had smiled and told her she was imagining things, that she worried too much, that she was turning nothing into something. By the time the truth came out, Melissa had stopped trusting the voice inside her own head. The divorce took care of almost everything else. When she saw the advertisement for a winter caretaker at Camp Silver Pines, she applied that same night. The pay was modest, but the job came with heat, electricity, and a small cottage until spring. For Melissa, that meant one thing: Sadie would have a bed. Camp Silver Pines appeared through the falling snow shortly before sunset. 32 empty cabins stood among towering pines. Beyond them, Lake Marlowe stretched dark and still, ice beginning to form along the shoreline. In summer, the camp welcomed hundreds of children. Now there was no laughter, no canoes, no campfires, only snow settling on empty porches. Kevin Brooks, the camp manager, met them outside the main lodge. He showed Melissa the generator, furnace, maintenance shed, and finally, the caretaker cottage. It was small and dated, with faded curtains and a heater that rattled whenever it turned on. Sadie walked into the little bedroom and set down her backpack. "Mom?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Are we going to stay here for a long time?" Melissa forced a smile. "Until spring." Sadie looked at the boxes by the door. "So we don't have to pack again for a while." Melissa felt something tighten in her chest. She hadn't realized her daughter had been counting. "No," she said softly, "not for a while." Before leaving, Kevin handed Melissa a heavy ring of keys. After a storm, check every building, roofs, pipes, windows, everything. Then he hesitated. Except cabin 7. Melissa followed his gaze toward the far edge of camp. A weathered cabin stood apart from the others, half hidden behind the pines. Boards covered its windows. "Why?" Kevin looked toward the cabin, then away. "That one hasn't been used since 1976. He said nothing more. A few minutes later, his truck disappeared down the mountain road. Melissa locked the cottage door behind her. Sadie was already kneeling beside one of the boxes, placing her books carefully onto a small wooden shelf. Melissa stood in the doorway and watched. For months, she had watched her daughter put things into boxes. Tonight, for the first time, Sadie was taking them out. It was such a small thing, but Melissa had learned that hope sometimes returned that way, not like sunlight breaking through the clouds, but quietly, almost shyly, in moments you could miss if you weren't paying attention. She let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe they could be all right here. Then her eyes drifted toward the kitchen window. Beyond the glass, at the edge of the darkening trees, stood Cabin 7. What stayed with Melissa wasn't Kevin's warning. It was the way he had looked away when she asked why. For the first 12 days, nothing happened, and Melissa was grateful for that. She settled into a routine that was simple enough to keep her mind from wandering. Each morning, she checked the furnace, walked the main path between the cabins, cleared snow from the lodge steps, and made notes about anything Kevin would need to repair in the spring. Sadie attended school online at the kitchen table. In the afternoons, when the weather allowed, the two of them walked down to Lake Marlowe and watched the ice slowly spread across the water. Little by little, Silver Pines began to feel less like the place they had escaped to, and more like somewhere they might belong. Melissa almost stopped thinking about Cabin 7. Almost. Then, one Thursday evening, the weather changed. The snow began just before dark and grew heavier by the hour. Wind moved through the pines with a low, restless sound, shaking snow from the branches and rattling the cottage windows. By 10 o'clock, nearly 8 inches had fallen. Melissa had just tucked Sadie into bed when she heard the maintenance alarm beep from the kitchen. A red light flashed beside the heating panel. Low water pressure north line. Melissa stared at it. Kevin had shown her what to do. A pressure drop usually meant a frozen or broken pipe. If she ignored it overnight, the damage could spread through the entire north section of camp. She pulled on her boots and coat. Sadie appeared in the hallway. "Where are you going?" "Just checking a pipe." "In the storm?" Melissa smiled. "I'll be 5 minutes." But outside, the wind was stronger than she expected. She followed the beam of her flashlight between the cabins, snow already filling her footprints behind her. Cabin 4. Cabin 5. Cabin 6. Then she stopped. The water pouring beneath the next building was already turning to ice. Cabin 7. Melissa stood there for several seconds. Kevin's warning came back to her. Except Cabin 7. She called him. No signal. She tried the camp radio. Nothing but static. Another pipe groaned beneath the building. Melissa looked back toward the distant light of the caretaker cottage. She thought about the repair bill. About losing this job. About Sadie packing her books into boxes again. "No," she whispered. "Not again." She tried every key Kevin had given her. None fit. Melissa was about to give up when Sadie's voice startled her from behind. "Mom!" Melissa spun around. Sadie stood several yards away in her snow boots and pajamas beneath Melissa's old parka. "Sadie, what are you doing out here? You forgot your phone." Melissa hurried toward her, angry for half a second before fear replaced it. "You never come outside alone at night. Understand?" Sadie nodded. Then she held out the phone and something else. A small brass key. "I found this in the desk when I was looking for the flashlight batteries." Melissa stared at it. Where? It was taped behind the bottom drawer. The key was old, darkened with age. Melissa looked from it to Cabin 7. "No," she said quietly. But another sharp crack sounded beneath the cabin. Water continued spreading across the frozen ground. Melissa took the key. It slid into the lock as though someone had used it yesterday. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Melissa turned it. The lock clicked. She told Sadie to wait on the porch while she pushed the door open. Cold, stale air moved past her. Her flashlight revealed narrow rows of bunk beds, old camp pennants, dusty shelves, and blankets folded exactly where someone had left them decades earlier. This wasn't an empty storage cabin. It looked abandoned in the middle of a summer that had never finished. Melissa found the shutoff valve near the back wall and turned it hard. The rushing water beneath the floor slowly stopped. She should have left then. Instead, her flashlight passed across the final bunk. Something had been carved into the wooden frame. Melissa stepped closer and brushed away the dust. Danny Reeves, 1976. Below the name were 5 words, cut deeper into the wood. I didn't run away. Melissa felt the room grow strangely still. Then her boot shifted. One of the floorboards moved beneath her. She crouched and lifted it. Hidden in the narrow space below was a rusted metal box. Inside were several Polaroids, a bundle of letters tied with faded blue string, an old Camp Silver Pines badge, and a small brass compass. Melissa picked it up. 2 initials were scratched into the back. D.R. Underneath them were 4 words. Find your way home. Behind her, Sadie spoke from the doorway. Mom, who's Danny? Melissa looked at the name carved into the bunk. She didn't know. Not yet. But whoever Danny Reeves had been, someone had hidden his belongings beneath this floor and locked the door for nearly 50 years. And suddenly, Kevin's warning sounded different. Maybe Cabin 7 hadn't been locked to keep people out. Maybe it had been locked to keep Danny's story in. Melissa barely slept that night. The metal box sat on the kitchen table beneath the yellow light above the stove, exactly where she had placed it after bringing Sadie back from Cabin 7. Outside, the storm continued. Wind pressed against the cottage walls. Snow gathered against the windows. Every now and then, the old heater clicked off, and the silence that followed seemed deeper than it had before. Sadie had finally fallen asleep around midnight. Melissa remained at the table. The brass compass rested in her palm. D.R. Find your way home. She turned it over again and again, wondering who had given it to Danny Reeves and why a 10-year-old boy had hidden it beneath a cabin floor. The letters were tied together with faded blue string. Melissa hesitated before opening them. She had the uncomfortable feeling that she was stepping into someone else's grief. But Cabin 7 had been locked for nearly 50 years. And someone had carved 5 words into a bunk as if they were afraid those words might be forgotten. I didn't run away. Melissa untied the string. The first letter was dated July 11th, 1976. It was written by a young counselor named Linda Barrett. The handwriting was neat at first. Danny came to me again after dinner. He says he doesn't want to go home when camp ends. I asked him why, but he wouldn't say. He just kept asking whether children ever get to choose where they live. Melissa stopped. She glanced toward Sadie's bedroom. There was something about that question that hurt more than she expected. She opened another letter. July 18th. He isn't causing trouble. I wish people would stop saying that. He's frightened. Though those are not the same thing. Melissa read that sentence twice, then a third time. By morning, she had read almost every letter. Piece by piece, Danny Reeves began to emerge from the paper. He was 10 years old. He liked fishing but hated swimming in deep water. He collected smooth stones from the shore and kept them beneath his pillow. He sometimes saved half his dessert because, according to Linda, he was never completely convinced there would be food tomorrow. And he was afraid. Not of the woods, not of the lake, of going home. One letter mentioned a man who had begun appearing near camp. Danny never gave Linda a name. He only called him the man in the red jacket. Melissa felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. She reached for the Polaroids. Most showed ordinary camp scenes, children beside canoes, counselors around picnic tables, boys holding fish proudly toward the camera. Then she found one of Danny. He was standing near Lake Marlowe, skinny and serious, holding the same brass compass Melissa had found beneath the floor. Behind him, perhaps 30 yards away, stood an adult man. His face was blurred by distance, but his jacket was unmistakable, red and black. Melissa stared at the photograph until she heard bare feet behind her. Sadie stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Couldn't sleep." Sadie shook her head. Melissa turned the photograph face down. "Come here." Sadie climbed into the chair beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then Sadie reached for the Polaroid. "Is that Danny?" "I think so." Sadie studied it. Then her expression changed. "Mom." Melissa heard something in her daughter's voice that made her look up. "What?" Sadie pointed at the figure behind Danny. "That man." Melissa waited. "I saw someone dressed like that yesterday." Her stomach tightened. "Where?" "By the lake." Melissa tried not to let fear enter her voice. "Are you sure?" The question left her mouth before she could stop it. Sadie lowered the photograph. "I think so." Melissa looked at her daughter, and suddenly she remembered all those nights in Albany. All the time she had asked her husband about a late text, an unexplained dinner, a receipt she didn't recognize. "Are you sure that's what you saw?" "You're reading too much into things. You always assume the worst." For months, Melissa had been taught to distrust herself one small question at a time. Now she had almost done the same thing to Sadie. She reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry." Sadie looked confused. "For what?" "For asking it that way." Melissa turned the photograph toward her. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Sadie thought for a moment. "A man near the trees." "I couldn't see his face. He had a red and black coat." "I thought he worked here." "When was this?" "Yesterday afternoon, when I was watching the lake from the bedroom." "Did he come near the cottage?" Sadie shook her head. "He just stood there for a little while." Then she added quietly, "And then he walked toward cabin 7. Melissa felt every muscle in her body tighten. She locked both cottage doors. Then she checked them again. At sunrise, the storm finally weakened enough for her phone to find a signal. Melissa searched Danny's name. The first result was an old newspaper archive. 10-year-old boy missing from Adirondacks summer camp. Danny Reeves had disappeared on July 23, 1976. According to the article, camp officials believed he had run away during the night. Search parties covered miles of forest. Divers searched Lake Marlowe. Dogs followed Danny's scent as far as the main road. Then nothing. No body. No confirmed sighting. No explanation. Melissa found another article from 2 weeks later. This one described Danny differently. Troubled. Withdrawn. Known to wander. Melissa thought of Linda's letter. He's frightened. Those are not the same thing. Then she found something else. A photograph from the search effort. Camp staff stood outside the main lodge beside sheriff's deputies and volunteers. Melissa enlarged it. Near the edge of the group stood a man. Red and black jacket. The same broad shoulders. The same dark hair. But this photograph was clearer. Underneath, the caption listed several names. One belonged to the camp director. Another to the sheriff. The last name made Melissa stop. Because she recognized it. Not the man. The surname. Brooks. Melissa stared at the screen. Kevin Brooks had never told her his family had been connected to Silver Pines in 1976. At that moment, her phone rang. "Kevin." Melissa looked at Sadie, then at the box on the table. She answered. "Morning," Kevin said. "Storm treat you okay?" Melissa hesitated. "We had a pipe break." "Where?" She looked toward cabin 7 through the kitchen window. "North line." There was a pause. "Not long." But long enough. Melissa, Kevin said quietly, you didn't go inside cabin 7. Did you? She didn't answer. The silence on the other end changed. When Kevin spoke again, the warmth had disappeared from his voice. What did you find? Melissa's eyes moved to Danny's compass. Before she could respond, Sadie suddenly grabbed her arm. Mom! She was staring out the window. Melissa turned. At the edge of Lake Marlowe, between the snow-covered pines, stood a man in a red and black jacket. And this time, Melissa saw him too. Melissa's first instinct was to pull Sadie away from the window. Stay here. She crossed the kitchen and looked again. The man was gone. Only the frozen edge of Lake Marlowe remained, pale beneath the morning sky, with snow drifting between the pines. Melissa. Kevin was still on the phone. She tightened her grip on it. Who is the man in the red and black jacket? Silence. Then Kevin exhaled. I'm coming up. Answer me first. I can't explain this over the phone. You warned me about cabin 7. You knew about Danny Reeves. And your family name is in the newspaper from 1976. Another pause. My father worked at Silver Pines. Kevin finally said, that's all I'm going to say until I get there. The call ended. For a moment, Melissa simply stood there. 3 months earlier, she might have accepted that answer. She might have told herself not to make trouble, not to assume the worst, not to trust a feeling she couldn't prove. She had spent years learning how to doubt herself. But something had changed. Maybe it was Danny's letters. Maybe it was Sadie. Or maybe Melissa was simply tired of being told that questions were dangerous because someone else didn't want to answer them. She turned to her daughter. The man you saw yesterday, was that the same man just now? Sadie shook her head slowly. I don't know. Melissa knelt so they were eye level. That's okay. Sadie looked surprised. You're not mad. Why would I be? Because maybe I was wrong. Melissa felt those words settle somewhere deep inside her. She brushed a strand of hair from Sadie's face. Being unsure doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Sadie nodded. Then Melissa said the words she wished someone had said to her years ago. If something scares you, you tell me. Even if you can't explain it. Even if you think nobody else will believe you. Will you? Melissa swallowed. I'll listen. That mattered more. Kevin arrived shortly after noon. He looked older than he had on their first day. Melissa placed the newspaper photograph on the kitchen table. Kevin didn't pretend not to recognize it. My father, he said. His name had been Walter Brooks. In 1976, Walter was 28 and worked maintenance at Silver Pines. He helped search for Danny after the boy disappeared. And the jacket, Melissa asked? Kevin looked toward the window. My father had one like that. Half the men around here did. Sadie saw someone wearing one yesterday. Kevin's expression tightened. That wasn't my father. He's been dead 11 years. Melissa waited. Why was cabin 7 locked? Kevin sat down slowly. Because after Danny disappeared, nobody wanted it used again. My father said the camp director ordered it closed. Years passed. People stopped asking. But you didn't. Kevin looked at her. No. For the first time, Melissa saw something in him that wasn't secrecy. It was shame. My father never believed Danny ran away. He said, he used to say there were things about that night the sheriff never heard. Like what? He never told me. Melissa almost laughed from frustration. Another man. Another secret. Another sentence ending just before the truth. But then Kevin added quietly, my father spent the rest of his life wishing he had asked more questions. That changed something. Melissa had been looking at cabin 7 as a place where someone had hidden the truth. Now she began to see it differently. Maybe it was also a place where people had left behind their regret. Danny had been afraid. Linda had hesitated. Walter Brooks had stayed silent. And somewhere between all those adults, a 10-year-old boy had disappeared. That evening, Melissa returned to Linda's letters. One sentence kept pulling her back. "He's frightened. Those are not the same thing." Melissa thought about how easily people label what they don't understand. A difficult child, an unstable wife, a frightened mother, a runaway boy. Sometimes a label was easier than listening. Sadie came quietly into the room and rested her head against Melissa's shoulder. "Are we leaving?" Melissa looked toward the boxes stacked beside the wall. For weeks, part of her had been waiting for the next disaster to force them to pack again. "I don't know yet," she admitted. Sadie was quiet. Then she said, "I like it here." Melissa smiled sadly. Even with Cabin 7, Sadie thought about it. Cabin 7 isn't the scary part. What is? Sadie looked at the letters. That nobody listened to him. Melissa felt tears sting her eyes. She put an arm around her daughter. That was the moment the mystery changed for her. She no longer wanted to know what happened to Danny because Cabin 7 frightened her. She wanted to know because somewhere in 1976 a little boy had tried to tell the truth. And nearly 50 years later, the world still remembered him by a word he had carved into the wood to deny. Runaway. Melissa looked down at the brass compass in her hand. For the first time since her marriage ended, she trusted the quiet voice inside herself without asking anyone's permission. Danny Reeves deserved to have someone finish listening. And Melissa intended to be that person. The next morning, Melissa drove into town alone. Kevin had offered to stay at Silver Pines with Sadie for a few hours. And, for once, Melissa accepted help without feeling that it meant she had failed. The storm had left the Adirondacks almost painfully beautiful. Snow covered the mountains in clean white layers, and sunlight flashed through bare branches as Melissa followed the narrow road toward town. The local historical society occupied the second floor of an old brick library beside the courthouse. That was where Melissa met Carol Whitman. Carol was 72, with silver hair pinned loosely behind her head and the careful manner of someone who had spent most of her life around books. The moment Melissa mentioned Danny Reeves, Carol stopped smiling. "I haven't heard that name in years." "You knew him." Carol looked toward the window. "I worked in the kitchen at Silver Pines that summer. I was 22. Melissa placed a photograph of Danny on the table. Carol touched its corner. "He was a sweet boy," she said. "Quiet. People confuse the two." Melissa thought immediately of Linda's letter. "He's frightened. Those are not the same thing. Do you remember the night he disappeared?" Carol's hand withdrew. "Everyone remembers the morning after." "That isn't what I asked." Carol looked at her. Melissa almost apologized. That old instinct again. Soften the question. Make the other person comfortable. Don't push. But she didn't apologize. After a long silence, Carol said, "Danny came into the kitchen the afternoon before he disappeared. What did he want?" Carol's eyes filled. "He asked me what time the bus left for Burlington." Melissa leaned forward. "Vermont." Carol nodded. "I thought he was planning to run away. So I told the camp director." Her voice broke slightly. "They took him back to Cabin 7. For nearly 50 years, Carol had carried one question. What if she had asked Danny why he needed that bus? "I thought I was protecting him," she whispered. "That's the part people don't understand about regret. Sometimes you can do what seems responsible and still spend the rest of your life wondering if it was wrong." Melissa said nothing. Some truths didn't need comforting. They only needed room. Then Carol remembered something else. Danny often went to an abandoned boathouse on the far side of Lake Marlowe, and Linda Barrett sometimes met him there. By late afternoon, Melissa was back at Silver Pines. She left Sadie with Kevin and followed the shoreline through knee-deep snow until she found the boathouse. The building leaned toward the frozen lake, its roof sagging beneath years of weather. Inside, everything smelled of damp wood and rust. Melissa searched slowly. Nothing. Then she noticed scratches near the floor beneath an old workbench. One plank lifted. Underneath was a narrow compartment. Inside lay a child's canvas backpack. Melissa knew before touching it. Danny's. There was a faded name written inside. Danny Reeves. Her hands trembled as she opened it. 2 shirts. A pair of socks. $7 in old bills. A folded piece of paper with an address in Vermont. And at the bottom, a bus ticket. Lake Marlowe to Burlington. Dated July 23, 1976. The night Danny disappeared. Melissa sat back on the cold floor. For the first time, the pieces seemed to fit. Danny hadn't wandered into the woods. He hadn't fallen through the lake. He had packed. He had asked about a bus. Linda knew he was frightened. Maybe she had finally believed him. Maybe she had helped him escape. And if Danny had reached Vermont, there was a possibility no one in Silver Pines seemed to have allowed themselves to consider. Danny Reeves might have survived. Melissa felt something she hadn't expected. Hope? She pulled out her phone and photographed the ticket. Then she noticed writing on the back. Only one sentence. The ink had faded, but she could still read it. Wait for me at the boathouse. I'll get you out before dawn. L. B. Melissa stared at Linda Barrett's initials. There it was. An answer. Or at least, it felt like one. She looked through the broken doorway toward the frozen lake. For nearly 50 years, Silver Pines had remembered Danny as a runaway. But perhaps Danny hadn't simply run away. Perhaps someone had helped him find a way out. Melissa carefully returned the ticket to the backpack. For the first time since opening Cabin 7, she believed she knew what had happened. She was wrong. Because when Melissa finally found Linda Barrett, the old woman would tell her something that turned the entire story upside down. Danny never got on that bus. It took Melissa 4 days to find Linda Barrett. There was no dramatic discovery. No secret address hidden in an old file. Just patience. A retired teacher in Vermont remembered the name. A disconnected phone number led to another. Eventually, Melissa found Linda Barrett, 73 years old, living alone in a small town outside Burlington. Melissa called twice. No answer. On the 3rd attempt, she left a message. My name is Melissa Grant. I'm the winter caretaker at Camp Silver Pines. She paused. I found Danny Reeves's compass. Linda called back 11 minutes later. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Linda asked, Where did you find it? Under the floor in Cabin 7. A breath came through the phone. Melissa told her about the letters, the backpack, and finally the bus ticket. I know you tried to help him, Melissa said gently. I found your note. Silence. Then Linda said something Melissa wasn't prepared for. No. Melissa frowned. No. I was supposed to help Danny leave. Linda's voice had changed. But I didn't. Melissa sat down. Linda explained that Danny had come to her terrified the night before he disappeared. He finally told her enough to make her understand that sending him home was not something she could risk. So Linda made a plan. She gave him money. Found an address in Vermont where people she trusted could take him temporarily. Bought the bus ticket. She told Danny to pack quietly and wait at the boathouse before dawn. But when I got there, Linda whispered, he was gone. The backpack was still hidden beneath the floor. The ticket was still inside. Danny never boarded the bus. Melissa felt the hope she had carried from the boathouse collapse beneath her. Then what happened to him? I don't know. Linda had asked herself that question for nearly 50 years. But there was one thing she had never told police. As she approached the boathouse that morning, she saw a pickup truck leaving the service road. Behind the wheel was Walter Brooks, Kevin's father. Melissa stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. Walter took Danny. "I don't know," Linda said. "I only know what I saw." For a moment, Melissa was back inside her marriage. A fact, a suspicion, a missing piece, and that familiar voice inside her whispered, "Maybe you're wrong." But this time, Melissa didn't silence herself. She also didn't rush to judgment. That was new. Trusting herself, she was beginning to understand, did not mean assuming every fear was true. It meant having the courage to keep asking until she knew. Melissa called Kevin. When she told him what Linda had said, he went quiet. Then he asked her to come to the maintenance shed. Kevin was waiting beside an old wooden cabinet. From the bottom drawer, he removed a photograph. Walter Brooks stood beside a pickup truck in 1976 wearing the same red and black hunting jacket from the Polaroid. "My father told me something before he died," Kevin said. "I never understood why it mattered." Walter had driven someone away from Silver Pines the morning Danny disappeared. He never said who, but he had kept an address. The same Vermont address Melissa found in Danny's backpack. Kevin looked ashamed. "I should have told you sooner." "Yes," Melissa said. She didn't soften it. Then she added, "But you can tell me now." Together, they traced the address. The family who once lived there was gone, but county records led to a name, then another, and eventually to a man who had grown up in that house. When Melissa called him, he remembered Walter Brooks, and he remembered a frightened 10-year-old boy arriving before sunrise in the summer of 1976. Walter had brought Danny there because Linda's plan had been discovered. The camp director was watching the bus station, so Walter changed the plan. He drove Danny himself. For nearly 50 years, Linda had believed she had failed him. She hadn't. Melissa called her that evening. "Linda," she said, fighting tears. Walter got him out. There was no answer, only the sound of an old woman beginning to cry. Did he live? Melissa looked at Sadie sitting across the kitchen table. "I don't know yet." But now she had something she hadn't had before. A trail. And something else had changed too. Months earlier, Melissa had arrived at Silver Pines unable to trust her own judgment. Now she understood that strength wasn't knowing all the answers. It was being willing to face what you didn't know without letting fear decide for you. Sadie reached across the table and touched the brass compass. "Do you think Danny found his home?" Melissa looked down at the words scratched into the metal. "Find your way home." She closed her hand around it. "I think we're about to find out." They found Danny Reeves 9 days later. Not through some dramatic police breakthrough or forgotten newspaper clipping. They found him through an obituary. The Vermont family, who had taken Danny in, had given him something Silver Pines never could a chance to begin again. Years later, he had taken their last name. Daniel Warren. He was 59 now. Married. 2 grown daughters. 3 grandchildren. And living quietly outside Burlington. Melissa stared at his photograph on her laptop for a long time. The boy from the Polaroid was still there somehow. Older, certainly. Gray at the temples, lines around his eyes. But the eyes were the same. She called him once. No answer. Then she wrote a letter. She told him who she was. She told him about Cabin 7. And at the bottom, she wrote only, "I have your compass." Danny called the next morning. They agreed to meet at a small diner outside Burlington. Melissa brought Sadie. Danny arrived alone. For a few seconds, Melissa didn't know what to say. How do you greet someone the world has considered missing for nearly 50 years? Danny sat across from them and looked at the brass compass Melissa placed on the table. His expression changed. I haven't seen that since I was 10. Melissa told him about Linda, about Carol, about Walter Brooks, about Cabin 7. When she finished, Danny remained quiet. Then Melissa said, "People should know the truth." Danny looked at her. "You found me," he said softly. "That doesn't mean you have the right to bring the world to my door." The words stung,